Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Florina Capistrano-Baker, who is the former director of the Ayala Museum, where she currently serves as a consulting curator and special projects consultant. Anina's scholarly work has been supported by grants from the Columbia University, Ford Foundation, Asian Cultural Council, American Association of University Women, Japan Foundation, Loxin Foundation, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Getty Research Institute. She is the co-editor of the multi-author volume Trans-Pacific Engagements, Trade, Translation, and Visual Culture of Entangled Empires from the 1565 to 1898, and a 2022 publication titled Intertwined Trans-Pacific, Transcultural, and the Philippines. So Dr. Florina, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. His Excellency Ambassador Daniel Hernandez Joseph, friends and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'd like to thank the Asian Civilisations Museum, the organizing staff, and most importantly, Clement On for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. The title of my talk, as you can see here, is Fashioning National Dress from the 19th Century Country Types to 20th Century Couturiers. This talk discusses the dress system of the Tagalog and Visayan people. We are Christianized, I say we because I'm Tagalog. These people are Christianized coastal populations whose customs and costumes were directly impacted by European presence, and most notably the Spanish-controlled Trans-Pacific trade. Customary garments of culture groups in the highlands of northern Luzon and the island populations of Mindanao are beyond the scope of this paper. Historically, clothing was created for two purposes: protection and adornment. Though the term dress and fashion are often used interchangeably, fashion scholars actually differentiate them more rigidly. Dress denotes material things that enclose the body, while fashion is a social phenomenon. So the word fashion is often problematic. As the anthropologist Sandra Neeson points out, fashion has been defined a priori as a Western phenomenon, a definition constructed on the cultural alterity. Consequently, fashion historians have bifurcated the world's dress systems into Western fashion and non-Western anti-fashion. The latter manifested in the unchanging traditional dress. Neeson further notes that the transformation of non-European clothing systems relative to Western styles is an important facet in the globalization of culture. This paper investigates an Asian dress system whose development was informed by Western fashion and global tradition and trade, namely Philippine dress in the Central Lowlands, a hybrid dress system that was self-consciously employed in the 20th century to visualize nation. I argue that in the Philippine context, the post-colonial hybridity is not static, but a strategy of becoming, an ongoing stratagem of defining self. The earliest illustrations of Philippines pre-colonial dress are late 16th century watercolors by an unidentified Chinese artist in a manuscript many of you know as the Boxer Codex, likely commissioned in the 1590s by the incoming governors Gomez Perez Dasmariñas and his son Luis Perez Dasmariñas, probably to give to King Philip II of Spain. This fold-out portrays a Manila Galleon traveling from Acapulco to Manila via the Ladrones, or the present-day Marianas. Images depicting Visayans are accompanied by descriptions written by an anonymous author, and I quote, "The dress and garments of Visayan women consist of brightly colored striped cotton fabric, though others are made from one of their plants from which they fashion these garments. And some of the women wear plain taffeta and damask from China. They accompany this floor garment with a bodice or doublet with ruffled half sleeves that reach down to the elbows, although some are full-sleeved, as you can see in the examples here. They are close-fitting and collarless. Tagalogs inhabiting the central coastal and riverine areas of southern Luzon in present-day Manila and its environs are similarly described, and I quote, "The jacket and bodices they wear are of the same form we have described regarding the Visayans. All of them wear small pieces of cloth over their clothing, which reach down to their waists. These are made of cotton and are of a variety of colors. Others are made of satin, taffeta, and damask from China." Also, additionally, I quote, "They are very fond of trading, selling, and bargaining with each other. Thus, they are great merchants and very cunning in their dealings." Smuggling, maybe. So, the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century unleashed historical processes that precipitated ruptures between the majority population in the central lowlands and cultural groups in the central lowlands of Luzon and the Visayas, and who converted to Christianity, and other culture groups in northern Luzon and Mindanao who fiercely resisted Western imperialism. So they were able to keep their traditional dress systems during the time of early contact. And while non-Christian communities largely preserved their pre-colonial dress systems during the early contact period, populations of the central lowlands began to develop a hybrid fashion system with entangled local and Western elements. One may argue that the basic pre-colonial two-piece garment with shoulder cloth that you see here of local and imported fabrics, such as on the left, persisted through time, mutating during the Spanish period into the hybrid barot saya, literally blouse and skirt, such as the example from the 1820s on the right. consisting of a blouse and shoulder cloth with wraparound skirt, which later survives in the tapis or overskirt worn over a Western style ankle length skirt or saya, which was introduced after Spanish colonization. By the 19th century, Philippine dress had transitioned from the draped garments of the early contact period, seen in the Boxer Codex, to hybrid forms informed by European fashion. The French theorist Roland Barthes, in his book The Language of Fashion, observes how special clothing and ornaments can be, and I quote, worn like an idea. Worn like an idea of terrific power, for it is enough to be seen for this power to be demonstrated, unquote. The generic barot saya on the left mutates to the traje de mestiza, literally meaning dress of the mestiza, such as on the right by Juanita Escurdia in 1929. And this is made of finer materials, a fuller skirt with a cola or a tail, and a translucent overskirt that you see, which references the saya. And I'm not sure I know how to use this pointer. There you go. So you have a translucent skirt that still references your original tapis, which I argue is a cultural survival from the pre-colonial period. The mestiza dress becomes more streamlined with matching designs on the skirt, the bodice, and the sleeves. Hence the term terno, which literally means matching, such as on the left you have matching designs on the skirt, the top, the sleeves, and even the shawl or panuelo. From this matching terno on the left, you ultimately get the sleek 20th century terno on the right, now widely considered the Philippine national dress. So in contrast to the multi-piece garments with front closure, the sleek one-piece terno with a back zipper, zippers were a big thing, becomes the standard design, such as the terno by Ramon Valera on the right. And the invented tradition of this national dress after independence from the US in 1946 derives from this hybrid dress system that evolved over 400 years of Western hegemony, a hybrid system that was deployed to visualize nation. I will now circle back to and discuss stylistic changes broadly noted above a bit more in detail. So I go back to country type watercolors or tipos del país, colonial photographs, and surviving examples of actual garments, and written colonial accounts, along with images of customary attire portrayed in paintings, which we call tipos del país, or country types, also depicted in prints and photographs, allow a reconstruction of the evolution of Philippine lowland clothing styles. 19th century tipos del país, or country types, document the types of garments local inhabitants wore, such as on the left, the basic barot saya, shown earlier with a long sleeve top and a wraparound skirt for the tapis. So you see here, you have the wraparound skirt, you have the long sleeve top, and you have this shoulder cloth. Again, I think surviving from your previous images of Tagalogs and Visayans with a two-piece garment and also always wearing some sort of shawl or shoulder cloth. And on the right, you have, I thought this was a very interesting photograph that I came across in the archives of the University of Michigan library, where you actually have tapis being used as the main skirt, but they already have changed their tops to a more open sleeve that is more characteristic of the later periods. Changes in sleeve design are captured in the Tipos del País paintings, such as the tight-fitting sleeves on the left, image of a mestiza by Damian Domingo from the 1820s, and you have a contrasting, wider type of sleeve by the time Justiniano Asuncion creates his own version of a mestiza about 20 years later in 1841. Elite women wore long tailored skirts, as you see here, called the saya, which is made from local and imported fabrics from China and India, and with sheer blouses of local piña, or nipis, literally meaning thin. And this is usually worn with various plant fibers, including bananas or abaca, and pineapple or piña. Notice that they're wearing, over their full skirts, they are wearing the traditional tapis. Other paintings from show elite men wearing tailored shirts and trousers of local and imported materials and top hats. So on the left, an elite Indio de Manila wears a sheer top with tight sleeves. Here, he's wearing it over embroidered silk trousers, which I'll discuss later. And by 1841, you have a similar mestizo, still wearing the European accoutrements of prestige, the top hat, umbrella, or sometimes a walking cane. But the shirt proportions have changed. They're a little bit longer. He's now wearing European-style trousers instead of the Chinese-looking silk trousers. So actual examples of early clothing that survived, the few that survived, really tell us that these paintings are pretty accurate because, for example, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, we see how accurate the depiction of the barong is with this early example that also shows a similar barong. This is certainly a different style from what we saw Kenny Ting and Clement On wearing yesterday. So it doesn't have quite as elaborate embroideries. It's not totally piña. There's more stripes and more restrained embroidery on the white panels and in between. But you see how the aesthetics are similar to the 1820 painting here. Elite men and government officials wore hybrid clothing, as I mentioned earlier, and this is consisting of either Western style accessories and pants, or in this case, the local Indio government officials wore the sheer nipis shirts and embroidered silk trousers imported from China in order to announce their elevated position. On the right, the silk trousers were previously known only through the paintings until I kind of excavated a cache of these rare trousers. There were 7 of them in the storage room of the Leiden Museum of Ethnology in 1991 when I was doing my doctoral research. So it was a very serendipitous discovery, which was quite exciting. And so the most significant finds in Leiden, in the Leiden collection, which were acquired in 1898 from a French dealer called Brejard. And it was not just the trousers. There was this huge collection of rare baro, priests' garments, accessories. It was all very exciting. But the most significant finds in Leiden collection are 7 of these rare embroidered trousers of fine silk damask, which we call saya, and which heretofore had been known only from the painted images, as you see here, dating to the 1820s. And these trousers, when you see them reproduced in the paintings of Damian Domingo and Jose Honorato Lozano, they're already labeled as being antique, antiguo, that's seldom seen. And these are from the 1820s to 1840s. So we're assuming that they could well have dated back to the 17th century instead of the 18th century, because they were not very much seen in the streets anymore. They were collector's items by the 19th century. So I mean, they're probably the 18th century. Okay, so the woven silk damask and embroidery motifs clearly indicate very Chinese motifs. The silk is clearly Chinese, and the motifs are also, they include dragons and phoenixes, and so they're clearly from a Chinese provenance. So the captions in some of these watercolors also tell us that the wearers were usually government officials. And interestingly, they were Indio government officials, not the Spanish government officials. For example, in these two tipos del país from Damian Domingo, we see an alguacil, one of the officers of the Indian justice, etc. So their titles are all captured in the captions, and it seems to me that the deliberate appropriation of local elite men, their appropriation of Western fashion, notice the Western blazer, it's kind of an eclectic combination where you have a local top, you have a Chinese, trousers, you have a European top hat, which, by the way, is not made of horsehair as they would be in Europe, but if you look closely, it's really buntal hat. It's raffia that they painted black to look like the horsehair. So it's all adapted for the local climate. So all 7 of these came to the Philippines for the first time in 2004, and to be exhibited at Ayala Museum, where they were remained on long-term loan from the Dutch Royal Embassy for several years until it returned to Leiden, where it went back to sleep in its nice little storage area, sadly. So scrutiny of the 19th, here's another example that I wanted to show you, and each of these trousers were of different size, different length, different girth, different waistlines, and so you can kind of tell the relative weight and the relative height of the previous owners. They're all elaborately decorated. The bottom, the sides, and even the pockets were decorated. So scrutiny of these country types also reveals other interesting insights. While studying, and again serendipitously, while studying the 19th century country types reveals the other insights, where scrutiny of these important visual records of customs, costumes, and occupations, I came across a Chinese master album at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem in 2005. And I came across a Chinese master album at the Peabody Essex containing Chinese copies of Asuncion's Philippine country types. Big, unexpected surprise. So on the left is a signed mestiza by Justiniano Asuncion at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And on the right, a Chinese copy in the album of Tingqua at the Peabody Essex Museum. And I think if William Sargent is here, you would know this costume, this album very well. So the copy of the Justiniano Asuncion watercolor that I showed you on the, I'm sorry, it was on the left, was contained in this album on your right, and it is dated 1854. So most of Justiniano Asuncion albums were paintings seem to have been done in 1840, 1841, 1842. So this is dated 1844. It has the stamp of the Cantonese export painter, popularly known as Tingqua. That's the cover. On the back, he has more inscriptions. And inside, there's a stamp with his face on it and with his symbol. Tingqua is thought to be the artist Guan Lianchang. He's very well known, very prolific Chinese export painter, considered a master. He was active from the 1830s to the 1870s. And I'm showing you another Chinese copy that's also within the album on your right, which is clearly a copy of Justiniano Asuncion image that you're very familiar with. So the Chinese replication of Philippine country types, such as was a previously unknown phenomenon, and until I first published my findings with great trepidation in 2004, because I was terrified that a lot of Philippine collectors would put me on their hit list, and it was kind of scary. Put it, mildly. So kind of did it gradually. I indicated that the Ayala Museum album was definitely a Chinese copy. I didn't want to really refer to the other private collectors, but I think eventually people came around and really saw that there's clearly the visual evidence really points to the fact that the only original Damian Domingo album that we know to date is in the Newberry Library. The only semi-complete album of Justiniano Asuncion costumes is in the New York Public Library, and now we've recently discovered some at the Metropolitan Museum Costume Institute Library. So why is this so important? First, I'm grateful to Karina Corrigan for providing access to the Peabody album and really generously sharing information about Tingqua starting in 2005. And we've kept in constant contact since then. Some of the Chinese copies are on exhibition upstairs, and I think we would have fun kind of comparing the original Justiniano with the Tingqua copies. It's one of the rare times you can see them side by side. The circulation of Philippine country types and their Chinese copies affirms the intertwined maritime trade networks linking Asia, the Americas, and Europe. So these copies, in particular, at the Peabody Essex, are from the collection of an American merchant family called the Hurd family, with the last name Hurd. And these are their trophies from the lesser-known trade between Manila and Massachusetts. This was from circa 1769 to 1858. The trade was between Salem and Massachusetts, also between Boston, but it really started between Salem and Massachusetts. And it was contemporaneous with a Manila Galleon trade, and then superseded it. It continued after the last galleons had sailed. So one of the most poignant narratives of this trade network is the saga of one of my favorite ships that I've been following. This is the American merchant ship Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen, if you go to the archives at the Baker Library, you'll see all the records of how she was built, how much the paintings cost, the paint cost, how much the wood, what kind of wood they used, etc., etc. So it took several years to build the Mary Ellen. She was registered and christened in 1841. You see on the right. But in 1847, after just a few trips back and forth between Salem and Manila, she was shipwrecked off an island near Singapore. So this was in 1847. So survivors were brought to Singapore, where the U.S. consul to Singapore had to issue certificates of citizenship. See an example on the right. In order for the American sailors who were survivors to allow them to return home. So that's just one example of all the perils and the hardship of all these voyages, whether you're dealing with the galleons or the American merchant ships and all the rival European ships that were trying to gain control and monopolize the trans-Pacific trade. The Leiden collection allows us to trace the evolution of blouses from tight, long sleeves to blouses and with sleeves that became wider and shorter. I'm going to go very quickly now because I think I'm running out of time. And then, so the overskirts were worn. The bell sleeves continued to be wider. The Spanish mestizas preferred to wear not a tapis but just a skirt. So you see the mestizas 1841, 1890. She's obviously not wearing a tapis. You also have not just Spanish mestizas, but you have here a Spanish mestiza wearing an imported brocade dress, skirt for her Maria Clara. You have a German mestiza. So it was very cosmopolitan society. And I have one page to go. Let's see how I can do this quickly. And so you also have the mantones de Manila that were replaced some of the shawls or that mimicked the shawls. And these were in the bauls. They were loaded in the bauls, and also loaded in these bauls were all these other luxury goods, such as the pre-colonial gold that people thought were manufactured elsewhere, but we know that this is from the galleon from San Diego shipwreck. You have the Nuestra Senora de la Concepcion shipwreck, and you have this continuity between the pre-colonial gold that were melted and fashioned into Christian colonial jewelry. So you have survivals of these pre-colonial gold forms and earrings that are now converted into Catholic type jewelry. So costureras came. They had to learn how to do the sewing machine. By the 1920s, you have the sobrefalda that was following the fashion of Europe. You have 1921 pasita longos. By 1947, you have Ramon Valera. And in the exhibition, you have a 1961, 62 debutante's gown. And the last point I'd like to convey is that since this is a melding of different cultures, it's an entanglement of local and foreign forms. It's not surprising that you have influences coming from the world capitals of fashion. You have Valera's debutante's gown in 1962 being informed by the very famous Dior gown from post-war period, with the Junot gown that reverberated throughout the world, and with Slim or Salvation Lim Higgins with her designs and upgrading of the terno for weddings. She also was influenced by her, she accepted the fact that she was influenced by foreign designers. So you have here, again, Christian Dior's iconic Venus dress, post-war 1949, which whose profile she adapts here for her wedding gown that she created in 1941. So just as closing, I'd like to say that contrary to the notion of non-Western dress as anti-fashion, the Philippine case demonstrates that non-Western dress systems are not necessarily static, but often mutate according to local and global trends. In the Philippines, early 20th century couturiers reinvented and transformed Filipino dress from homemade concoctions to haute couture for both local and international consumption, deploying the national dress as a visual expression of nation and as gateway to global prestige. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina, for that really fascinating talk. You've taken us, in 30 minutes, you've taken us through 400 years of fashion and dress history in the Philippines and really highlighted how not only long and drawn out, but also how complex that process is. And you've argued, so convincingly that the garment that's we know today as the Philippine garment is really a visual expression of the nation and self in the 20th century. I wonder if you could comment on how the national dress or the Philippine dress could be read as a garment of subversion in regard to how it melds together both an element of localization, but also this adaptation of foreign influences, because as you say, this amalgamation of so many different factors it's not random, but absolutely actively applied and as well with a lot of local agency. So Nina, please.
Thank you for that question, Naomi. I think in a lot of cultures, there are different ways of dealing with cultural resistance, especially with colonized cultures. We have subtle ways of resisting foreign colonization. So we may appear to be kind of going along. For example, our Catholicism is not really the same brand of Catholicism that you would find in the Western world. So there are a lot of survivals of indigenous practices. In the same way, in the mode of dress, as I showed you with the Boxer Codex, we had our dress system. We had our we accessorized. Everything had a meaning, and even the jewelries had apotropaic powers. They were not just for ornamentation, but they were for protection. They had religious significance. So when we began to develop this hybrid dress system, I think we picked and chose what we would keep and what we would adapt. And I think one of the things that I think we chose to keep is the tapis. And Ambeth Ocampo, I will ask you to agree or disagree with me, but it seems to me I've seen this in other cultures in the Pacific as well, in Fiji and other Polynesian cultures, that when they became Christianized, the tapa cloth or the sarong is widespread in all over the Pacific. That is something that they kept. Whether they're wearing Christian dress, they would insist on putting their traditional tapis over it. So I think I'm seeing a parallel here in the Philippines where our traditional dress was this wraparound skirt, and you see it as, as we became Christian, we were adopting, or we were being kind of coerced or encouraged to adopt a Western type of blouse, which was easy enough, fine, but the skirt I think we continued the topics, and I showed you one of those photographs that I came across in Michigan, where it's really this fascinating combination of the tapis with a piña butterfly sleeves, which I hadn't encountered before. But normally what would happen would be we would be encouraged to wear a Western type saya or longer dress, but because, and this is what some scholars say, that the missionaries, because they were concerned about issues of modesty, that our fabrics were too thin, that they encouraged the use of the tapis to disguise the contours of the body, in the same way that when we use the thinner nipis, thinner abaca and piña, we were encouraged as well to use a shawl to cover the chest area. Which again also evolved into part of our national costume. But what's interesting is, as I go through the archives, I go to the photographs, the tipos del país, and then of course the country types will always indicate this is India de Manila, Indio de Manila, mestiza, and of course mestiza meant Chinese mestiza, right? And then mestiza española, etc., etc. You notice that when it's mestiza española, she's not wearing a tapis. And this is also what I found in the early photographs from the 1890s, 1900s. The mestiza-looking inhabitants were not wearing that overskirt, but you will see the Indian or Indio, the local women, the Chinese mestizas, they're wearing the tapis. It's kind of like a symbol of pride, and you feel incomplete without that tapis. So I think that kind of became sort of a form of resistance, that, you know, this is part of me and you're not going to take this away from me.
Thank you so much, Nina, for that really wonderful explanation. I wonder if there are any questions that we have for our speaker today.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I want to ask, as cultural symbol, how the national dress of the Philippines were promoted. Because in Singapore, we try to promote the kind of flower, the batik in the 80s, but it wasn't very successful. It is true the way you presented on stage, to what extent that had helped to promote your national dress?
Thank you for the question. That's very interesting, and also there were many kind of different ways of doing that, because on the one hand, we had, when we were moving up to independence, and there are several studies on this actually, the use of the female dress versus the male. The male tended to adapt the Western type of clothing as a way of gaining power and gaining equality with the American colonial masters, whereas the female used the traditional dress, again, as a symbol of resistance, maybe as the culture bearers, but it was around the time of independence that there was really a very conscious decision to develop a national dress that would identify us as Filipinos. So even the men, like Ramon Magsaysay, really promoted the use of the Barong Tagalog instead of the American dress. And many of these young couturiers now made it part of their mission to use Filipiniana, Philippine dress, and to kind of promote it. But I think it was also kind of a double strategy, because there was the Philippine National Dance Company that many of these couturiers designed for. And back in the day, 1958, the first Philippine National Dance Company was Bayanihan. Philippine Dance Company became world famous in 1958. Full disclosure, I was a member of that company, though not in 1958. So I kind of know the inside history, and I've been doing a lot of research on that in preparation for an upcoming exhibition. So what's really interesting is in the 1940s, 1947, just after independence, the Roses, who was the director of education, was sending messages through the newspapers, through his, his declarations that we need to promote our national identity, and one of the best ways to do it is through bayanihan, because it was bayanihan does traditional dance, traditional music, and I know you know Lucrecia Casilag and Lucrecia Urtula. They're all national artists now, and they were kind of the vehicle for the couturiers to find an audience overseas, because Philippine fashion was not really that well established, but bayanihan was. Because when they went to the Brussels World's Fair in 1958, they made a huge splash, and President Garcia called them the ambassadors of goodwill. They did a Broadway debut. Roses, as Secretary of Education, was lauded the accomplishments because they're wearing Filipina dress. They're dancing Philippine traditional dances. They're bringing traditional Philippine culture. They're proving to the world that we are not savages, we are not headhunters, we are educated, we are cultured, we are skilled. And so this, became a huge thing. And if you look at the newspapers from the 1950s, you'll see all these dancers, each one with a picture with, their whole history. You have images of their costumes and, the whole entire pride. And after this initial opening of the gates to the international world of culture and fashion, you have these fashion designers now coming in, emulating some of the bayanihan costumes and converting it to haute couture. So you have Rita Moreno, wearing designed by Christian Dior. You have Slim designing couture that mimics some of the costumes. So they're riding on this Philippine identity and Philippine style and designing for Margot Fontaine, Alicia Markova, who else? A lot of these very George Hamilton, even Charlton Heston, in a barong. Can you imagine that? So there was this thing going on, and that's how they tried to make Philippine fashion kind of a big thing and desirable in the U.S. and in Europe.
Well, thank you, Nina. So I think that's all the time we have for now, but I encourage you to please approach Nina if you have further questions at our tea break, and we'll catch you shortly.
Thank you.
We have one more panel before our tea break. So sorry about it, Circe. So it as well brings me great pleasure. We're very excited to have for our next speaker, Circe Henestrosa, who is a fashion curator and the head of the School of Fashion at LaSalle College of the Arts in Singapore. She curated the exhibition Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving in 2012 at the Frida Kahlo Museum in Mexico, as well as Frida Kahlo Making Herself Up at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which traveled to several destinations in New York, San Francisco, and Paris. Circe, please.
Okay. Are you still up? Okay. I'm always so excited to be here. This is one of my favorite museums. Let me see how this works. I just press, right? I hope. Okay. I am delighted to be invited to participate here at this conference today with so many experts. Thank you to the ACM, Kenny, Ting, Clement, and all the team. And of course, His Excellencies are here today. Thank you also for your support and for being here. Today, I will talk about cross-cultural fertilization and hybrid textiles and fashion along the Galleon route. But also about the curatorial conversations around the textiles galleries that Clement and I had around this exhibition. And I always like starting with Frida Kahlo, one of the most prominent Mexican female artists known for her self-portraits. Her work has been celebrated internationally as emblematic of Mexican national and indigenous traditions. Also by feminists for its uncompromising depiction of the female experience and form. I have been working with her archive of personal belonging for nearly 10 years. And later, I will get back to her to discuss her dress. Okay. When talking about the Manila Galleons, I find it fascinating how the world was interconnected through textiles and fashion. The Manila Galleons transported textiles of all different types: flowered silk, velvets, fine damasks, heavy brocades, fine cottons, and shawls. Upon arriving in Mexico through the port of Acapulco, all these different beautiful textiles were sold on to other Latin American regions, such as Peru, Ecuador, Panama, and Nicaragua. Manila was a strategic meeting point to gather silks from China, spices from Southeast Asia, and cottons from India. The trade routes between port cities have always exchanged goods as well as knowledge from different parts of the world. And these cultural encounters were quickly translated into new hybrid communities that created their own art, fashion, cuisines, and at times their own language. I would like to define this term of transculturation. The Cuban historian Fernando Ortiz coined this term, transculturation, in 1940 to describe how cultures mix and blend. Transculturation involves more than simply moving from one culture to another. It is not just the assimilation into the existing by the new dominant culture, which is called acculturation, or the incidental or intentional discarding of an old culture, deculturation. Instead, it refers to the merging of these ideas, and this will lead to new cultural events. Creating something completely new, where both cultures have agency. And this aspect of this definition and the definition of transculturation was very important to me. And with this in mind, when Clement invited me as a curatorial advisor for this exhibition, I wanted us to treat these materials and these objects at equal footing. So when Mexico and Peru emerged as commercial centers for Asian goods around 1580, goods from China became part of the vocabulary of textiles and dress in the Americas. Mexican fashions were heavily influenced by Asian fashions. And in Mexico and Peru, native features and designs were incorporated into local pieces. I'm not sure if you were aware that China and the Far East gave embroideries to the world. And for example, while in Mexico we have our own ancient millenary weaving techniques, very quickly, indigenous people in Mexico began to incorporate Spanish and Chinese techniques into their work on imported fabrics from China and Manila. So this is an example of a Ming textile. And here we can see clearly how Ming textile designs inspired Peruvian textile artisans. These tapestries woven in Peru are almost based entirely on the emblematic Chinese designs of flora and fauna, as you can see in this marvelous example. Here we see decorative elements such as mythical creatures, like the phoenix, the deer, dragons, that are all from Chinese mixed origin. But we can also see Christian symbols. You can see also symbols as a pelican in her piety, and other colonial symbols such as the double-headed eagle. So that's a really interesting example. So the next one is this amazing poncho. This example has Chinese embroiderers were commissioned to embellish traditional Andean and Mexican garments, as well as those from European origins. So in this example, around the 18th century, probably, this poncho would have been embroidered with this colorful phoenix in China, and then would have been brought back to the Americas or to Peru to be assembled with the construction, the geometrical construction of this type of garment, which is popular in the Andes. Araceli Tinajero wrote a text on Far Eastern influences in Latin American fashion in the Latin American Fashion Reader, where she showed also how Far Eastern fashions influence the apparel of upper classes that then trickled down and in the process transformed the fashions of the lower classes. So now I'm going to move to the hybridization of the Tehuanas. Perhaps one of the most emblematic of all Mexican national dresses is the Tehuana ensemble. The Tehuanas come from the Tehuantepec Isthmus, a matriarchal society located in the southeast part of Mexico, where women administrate the society and dress in the Tehuana attire. Here, the embroidery and flower motifs on the traditional dress worn by the Tehuanas are heavily influenced by the embroidered flowers and Chinese techniques of the Manila shawls. So here we see an example, the example we have in the gallery. So these shawls arrived in Mexico en route to Spain, but many of these pieces remain in Mexico and were sold within Mexico and other Latin American regions. And this is how the shawls arrived in Tehuantepec. So the peony motif, influenced by Chinese textiles, remains today one of the most iconic flowers portrayed in the Tehuana dress, as we see this example with this beautiful lady and the detail of the Manila shawl next to it. And it became an essential element in their self-constructed identity. Borrowing and adapting these Chinese embroideries and laces from Europe, they cross-fertilized and translated them into their own visual language, creating a unique Tehuana dress that defined and represented them as local indigenous women. Today, the peony and chain stitch embroideries remain an iconic motif on the visually powerful Tehuana attire that has become a symbol of femininity, indigeneity, and Mexican pride. So now I want to share with you this very personal photograph because I have a personal connection with this dress. I am aware of this dress. And my family on my father's side come from the Tehuantepec Isthmus. And if you see, I don't know how to point here, but you can see these two ladies here are my great aunts that were indigenous women from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And when Frida Kahlo decided to wear her dresses, my aunties used to bring Frida her dresses from the Tehuantepec region. So when I started this research and working with Frida's personal wardrobe, I started looking and I wanted to know why she had selected this dress as her logo. So here you see this very iconic photograph by Nicolas Muray, taken in 1938 of Frida, and you can see how Nereida is wearing the same skirt that Frida is wearing here. So I find all this very fascinating because you see how these cross-cultural dialogues between regions have been happening for years. And if in the colonizer eyes, Latin America and Asia were regarded as the exotic other, what would happen when another exotic culture influenced its very ways? Who would remain exotic? And this takes me now to this idea of hybridity that we were discussing in the previous talk. So hybridity acknowledges that identity is formed through an encounter with difference. Homi Bhabha does not consider it as merely fusing existing cultural elements. Rather, hybridity refers to the process of the emergence of a culture in which its elements are being continually transformed or translated through the irrepressible encounters. And that takes me now to Singapore. Because every time, and I always ask my students, when curating an exhibition, in my case a fashion exhibition, why is it relevant to talk about this specific topic today? Or why to place such a big display of the Manila Galleons in Singapore? Everything in Singapore dwells around hybridity. And Singapore, way before the Manila Galleons, had already traded with this part of the world. And Peter Lee, in his text Dressing Badly in the Ports, Experimental Hybrid Fashion in Asian Port Cities, discusses how fashion in Singapore was a hybrid of different cultures from the beginning. He argues that mixing and matching of materials and clothes has been happening in Singapore for a very long time. So for example, here we see a woman wearing this beautiful kimono, but she's also wearing the Kasut Manik slippers that come from the Peranakan culture, the beaded slippers. And at the same time, you cannot see she's also wearing this beautiful brooch known as Kerong-sang. Am I saying it correctly? Kerong-sang. Yes? Booms. Okay, so therefore this mixing and matching of ideas is not a new concept. And in fact, the definition of fashion or of global fashion is deeply rooted in this concept of Asian port cities. And that's why it's so interesting to see such a beautiful display and exhibition here, where we are looking precisely at those cross-cultural encounters and dialogues between Asia, the Philippines, and the Americas. So here we have another example on how Malay women would wear and adopt also Western fashion, using French laces for their veils. And sarongs would also come from India, Java, and Sumatra. And kebayas were made of imported laces as well. So now I move on to the Peranakans. From the 16th to the 19th century, Southeast Asia saw a particularly heightened level of exchange driven by trade, colonization, and technological advancement. Chinese people migrated to Southeast Asia, where they formed familiar connections frequently through intermarriage with local women, giving rise to Peranakan culture. And I have to say, this is one of the most beautiful cultures I have ever encountered. The Peranakan Chinese community resided predominantly at the ports of the archipelago, forming part of a vibrant and diverse cultural environment. As the region developed, its culture also transformed. Chinese practices and beliefs became intertwined with the local way of life. So this is an example of the Peranakan Chinese beadwork and embroidery, which are distinguished by their use of opulent materials, meticulous craftsmanship, sophisticated design, and elaborate textures. And here you can see the presence of the peony again. These objects hold special cultural significance within the community, particularly among women, referred to in Baba Malay as ñoñas. The Peranakans cleverly adopted beading techniques from Europe and combine them with local motifs such as peonies bordered by phoenixes, flora and fauna, butterflies, as we can see in many representations of the beautiful objects. So here we can observe also how Peranakan Chinese adopted their preferred elements from the East and the West and translating this into their own hybrid language. So for me, was important to contextualize what was happening here as well, because it's about the attitude. This has to do more with the same attitude that the Tehuanas, in which the Tehuanas took the embroideries from China and adopted them the way they liked them. This was, the peony is a motif that comes from China. So this is not adapted, this is assimilated because it's Chinese culture to Chinese culture, but represents again the symbol of opulence and of royalty and of beautiness, the same way the Tehuanas incorporated it. And now we move quickly back to the Philippines. And what happened in the Philippines? Once the explorers and colonizers tasted the pineapples in Panama, Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela, news of the fruit's appeal spread rapidly. Through the galleon trade, the fruit, and occasionally complete pineapple plants, as the ones you're seeing here, were introduced to India, China, the Philippines, Java, West Africa, Bermuda, and other regions. Pineapples are documented to have entered the Philippines by 1558. And as early as 1571, people of the Philippines had begun to make piña cloth from the fibers extracted from piña leaves. And this is incredibly, incredibly avant-garde. The thinking. The fiber from the indigenous abaca plant had long been used to make juicy fabric commonly used in the Philippines. So what happened is that they saw in the Philippines the quality of the piña leaves, and they immediately said, we can create a fiber. However, as opposed to the juicy, the piña exhibited a greater degree of sheerness and luster, enhancing its desirability. And here we see some beautiful examples. If you see, the previous language I was showing you, it was very colorful. So what happens here, Spanish missionaries in Manila were responsible for the introduction of the embroidery as an art form. And it was the nuns who were teaching this. And you see the language is white on white. And that gave a complete different quality and language to this product that distinguished itself from the very colorful Manila shawls we had in the Americas and in Spain. So then these embroideries with intricate designs and sheer materials became the most coveted products in the 19th century. And today fashion in the Philippines, as we saw in the previous talk, became and are still today a very important material, which not only is appreciated as a national treasure, but is also part of national dress. But I want to point out, in terms of contemporary fashion, 1571 the Philippines was creating already sustainable processes in fashion with this natural fiber. And I find that extremely, extremely ahead of their time. And with this beautiful lady, with that beautiful blouse, I would like to finish this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Circe, for that fabulous discussion. I think one of the points that you really emphasize is this process of hybridization. And you made this really amazing parallel between how the peony was adapted by weavers in Tijuana and how in certain Peranakan objects, the same motif was similarly embraced. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about this? Almost, there are certain motifs and materials that have a certain kind of universal appeal, it appears. Is this something that we can talk about things that everybody from different markets would probably want the same things?
I guess, well, as you could see, the peony, in terms of the way it was adapted to the Manila shawls or the Tijuana dresses, was very different to the way it was assimilated in the Philippines, because the peony as a flower was already present, was also present in these beautiful piña garments. I guess, yes, and that's the point. And when I started the conversation saying how exciting it is, or it was to see while I was looking at all these materials, how we are interconnected, how these motifs and techniques weave our histories. So, yeah, I think it's definitely something that happened then and continues to happen here today. And I wish we could have nowadays between designers and this exchange of craftsmanship, more collaborations between, for example, artisans in India with artisans in Mexico, because at the moment it feels that everyone is doing, again, just their own thing. But it would be nice to have, I don't know, in the future, more projects or more collaborations between artisans from different regions as it used to be before.
Thank you, Circe. Are there any questions for our speaker today? It's just
Hi, thanks for a lovely talk. I'm kind of curious why, since the pineapple originated in the Americas and continued to be cultivated there, is there any narrative of piña cloth being made in the Americas, both before and after colonization? And why not then?
I don't know. I have to tell you, I mean, the Philippines was like, they were thriving and like, okay, let's do this. Yeah. It's an interesting, and actually, if you go to the exhibition, it's very intentional. As I was saying, this idea of transculturation and how we wanted the objects across the exhibition, and it's particularly in the textiles gallery, you will see that we wanted to choose a motif that came from Asia, and from Asia crossing the ocean all the way to the Americas, and the vitrine, the way it's contextualized, is through the objects. So you will find the Manila shawl, the Tijuana dresses, and the Peranakan objects all connecting the peony. But on the other hand, we also wanted an element from the Americas that came to Asia, and that was the piña that came to the Philippines. So with that in mind, the whole gallery of the Philippines is in white, because the aesthetic, as I was showing, it was white on white, and the gallery showing the motif that came from China to the Americas is all in color. So for me, it's very important to use the exhibition space as critical discourse, and very easily for the viewer to come and at a glance understand that story. And no, we didn't do that in Mexico. Definitely not before 1571. I mean, probably later on, but in Mexico, there has been much more a hybridization and adaptation of embroidery techniques that now represent textile material culture that belong to our indigenous communities there. But no, I don't know of anybody else in the Americas that was doing. I think contemporary practice probably in Brazil, definitely, but not that I know in Mexico.
Yes, Kenny up in front.
Hi, Circe. Lovely to see you on stage.
Hi, Kenny.
We've spoken about dress and fashion, but I'm very fascinated also by the figure of the craftsman or craftswoman, who is ubiquitous because he or she would have made everything. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how the craftsmen or women or communities of craftsmen or women would have been seen or regarded at the time. By, I guess, the consumers who desired the works that were made, maybe in the Mexican communities.
Well, mainly, it's interesting that you're saying that, Kenny, because mainly in Mexico, this textile craftsmanship and material culture is produced by women, and it was assimilated by women at the time. And this is a very important aspect that I wanted to also build when placing the Peranakan objects there, because it was also driven mainly by women. The hand, the craftsmanship around it. And the same in the Philippines with the nuns training people. So it is a very female how to say, sensibility. However, in India, craftsmanship and textile material production is in the hands of men. So that's very different to our stories, but ours is much more through these matriarchal societies, the presence of women taking this aspect of embroideries and beauty, really, incorporated into their garments. Did I answer the question? No? Yeah? No, if I haven't, tell me, ask me more.
When we discuss fashion, there's always this question of, how visible the communities of craft are to the end product and what their role is. I was wondering if they had a different place, communities of craft, at the time.
No, I think they were the people, because they were, if the same people who were the artisans were the wearers, and that continues to be the case today. So you go to Mexico and you see these amazing indigenous communities wearing these beautiful garments that are produced by them, by themselves. So it was like that then as well. Yeah, definitely. And in contemporary practice, yes, like today, it continues to be like that. Sometimes sometimes what they're wearing it's nicer than what they're selling. It's very strange. And then my friend Carla Fernandez used to say, like, no, but I want what you're wearing, not what you're offering me. And she's like, oh, okay, fine.
Thank you. We just have time for one really quick question, if there's one. If not, then that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Circe.
Okay, thank
yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lester, and everyone for the applause. So it's with much pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, Dr. Cristina Martinez-Juan, who will be speaking about her work as the project head of Philippine Studies in SOAS. The Philippine Studies in SOAS is an interdisciplinary forum for Philippine-related teaching, research, and cultural production in the UK. Her talk today will focus on the Mapping Philippine Material Culture project that is ongoing. Without further ado, Dr. Martinez-Juan, please.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, and everyone in the audience. I thank you very much to ACM for the opportunity to be with you all today. So I have been asked to round out this last day of the conference by looking at the Manila Galleon trade and its continuing significance today and into the future. So I will do this by looking at the Manila Galleon trade through the lens of an ongoing digital humanities project and give an overview of its methodologies and goals, to be followed by a few case studies. So we'll just go through them quickly that will illustrate what we have and are trying to do with the mapping project. So, since establishing Philippine Studies at SOAS in 2018, or 2019-2018, we had to wrestle with a very real problem of how do you create meaningful area studies program in the West? Like, why don't you just go to the Philippines and study the Philippines in the Philippines? But the institution is in the West, so we had to struggle with, aside from teaching the Philippine languages, for example, or create modules, like I teach Jose Rizal, Nole Metangere, or I teach bleaching ads as cultural texts. We wanted to go beyond that, and we wanted to make ourselves sort of kind of essential in a way. So based on consultations, we had to we began to see a real need that people will say, you know, whenever there are Filipino scholars, etc., to make Philippine Studies at SOAS kind of like a research gateway. In situ, we had all these colonial repositories of knowledge, either texts, manuscripts, sound archives, or material culture, everything in the British institutions. As you know, they're very good at collecting things. So these are all repositories or objects of knowledge that are in institutions outside of the Philippines. So as a Philippine Studies Center and as a research gateway, what we wanted to do was to give access, no, to the cultural, these repositories of knowledge, and give access to Filipino scholars, cultural and historical stakeholders, and source cultures, including in the diaspora. So as you can see, we have implemented several digital humanities projects. We began with Digital Filipiniana, which is basically a baseline digitization straight up. And then we got into repatriating a lost archive of the Spanish Pacific, which my co-PI is Cristina Lee of Princeton. So what we're basically doing there is reconstructing the lost library of the San Agustin which was ransacked by the British in 1762. So we're basically looking for, based on auction records and different things, we looked everywhere for these dispersed manuscripts. We've digitized them, and we are now in the process of putting them together on one digital platform. The other one is the BBC Sound Archives, which are broadcasts to Southeast Asia in the colonial and late colonial period. And we are making that accessible online as well. And lastly, which is the material culture, the digital the mapping Philippine material culture. So this afternoon, I'll basically focus on the mapping site. So we define material culture in its broadest sense. So we refer to physical objects and artifacts that people create and use, and which embody a people's technical skills. It reflects their beliefs, values, practices, and social structures. These objects can include anything from tools, clothing, architecture, and art. We do not make a distinction between folk art or artisanal art. Its material culture is everything of all of this embodied, no? And as Adichie says, material culture is important, especially for a post-colonial nation, because they are living expressions in some ways of resistant identities, telling the stories of triumph over adversity, of agency. So you can look at these objects as of those, and of cultural continuity in the face of colonialism, of trauma, of violence. And especially, these are singular ways of seeing and understanding a cultural identity, no? So, and as we know, I guess if you're familiar with the kind of the heartbreaking part of Philippine material culture is that a majority of them are, and I can gather a lot of post-colonial countries as well have the same dilemma, that most of it, the majority would be in institutions outside of the Philippines. So as Marianne says, it's kind of a lobotomy, no? of this cultural memory embodied in these objects, them being outside of reach, no? So why a digital mapping project? So we see the mapping project as a navigational tool. We want to know, what are these objects? Where are they? How did they get there? How do you begin? The question has always been, how do you begin the process of knowing or valuing if one does not know what's out there? So a lot of work that we do is actually detective work. We do a lot of actually searching and identifying objects, and later on even cataloging. We just finished cataloging the objects in the Liverpool Museum. These were transferred over to the Liverpool Museum in 1916 from the American Museum of Natural History. And they have never actually cataloged these materials. They just kind of put them in the storage and nobody's actually seen them. And so part of the work that we do is to catalog them and then put them online, make them accessible. So we call these objects orphaned objects. Usually a majority, 98% of the objects that we have in the digital mapping site has never been exhibited and are really hard to access. So the digital platform kind of gives that access. So just a few examples of the kind of detective work that we've been doing. And most of these are actually just tips from people. They email me, or there's a contact button at the top. So this one is actually really interesting. We found this in the Museo Civico Medievale in Bologna, Italy. So it was a bamboo container. It has been on display since 1986, but no one kind of knew about it until somebody said, oh, there's some Villarde something in Bologna. So this was actually donated by the Jesuit, Pedro Murillo Villarde, who was 1696 to 1753. And he donated it to the museum in Bologna. And it has been there for the longest time. And sometime in the 19th century, it was transferred to this, of all places, the Civic Museum of Medieval History in Bologna. So we don't know how that happened, but yeah, it's a really interesting thing. There's a lot of similarities to bagay and the ukit sort of thing. If you turn the bamboo, it's there are figures that are similar to the vignettes in the Murillo map. We don't know if it's something where they put the map in it or they call it a quiver, but we don't really know. But that's kind of the exciting things that we constantly discover. No? This is another one. This is a more recent one. This was an escudo de armas, which is taken from the Intramuros during the British invasion in 1762. So there's still a lot of analysis that we need to do in terms of material and how it well, we know how it got there. There's a plaque at the bottom that says victory for Britain. This is a trophy of war. So right now, before it was in the armory in Fort St. George, and then they transferred it to the government museum. So you can visit this now. It's in a very bad condition. It's kind of stuff in between these two vitrines. It's very dusty, but yeah, it's we've studied it a bit. I consult a lot of people about kind of the is it the coat of arms? They say maybe it's a governor, maybe Tamon, because of the fleur-de-lis in the middle, which is kind of the Bourbon dynasty, indicative of the Bourbon dynasty. But anyway, the digital platform is, these are, it's something that we do because of certain technological advantages that you can say from a digital platform. So aside from its accessibility, the aggregation of data in one platform allows for relational analysis. So it shows emerging patterns. Once you get all your data together, you can look at similarities, thematic links, in this case, material evidence of something that Nina was talking about, of material evidence of a painting here. And then we found, Nina found it and wrote about it, actually. You can go to the website, and she has a good object biography of these trousers, these silk trousers. And what's interesting was that after Leiden, we also found similar ones in Branly. So there were more and more of these popping out. And so I guess you begin to know what to look for once you know something. So yeah, it's been very interesting just putting them all together. So now we have these across 3 institutions. You can look at the essay of Nina on the site. So aside from that, this sort of aggregation of data allows us to reconstruct, as I was saying, for example, dispersed or fragmented material culture. Most of them are symbolic complexes of meaning that have been, different collectors get the sword or they get the headgear, etc. And this is a good example of how you're able to remember the sort of chopped up parts of this Mandaya warrior and his ensemble. So if you look at this Balarao, these are all from different institutions, but now they're on kind of one plane where you see everything reconstructed on one level. And then other things that we do technologically is we do algorithmic patterns. These are recurring patterns, so you can put in certain characteristics of like this Madonna, for example. So it can spit out similar materials, kind of like reverse imaging in Google. No? So you put in an image and then it gives you many similar ones. And of course, there's always an advantage in having this type of tool because as Australian Marcos has always said, connoisseurship has always been just being able to go through samples, thousands and thousands of samples, and then after a while you just kind of know, right? Then you see one thing and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely made in the Philippines. So the other types of research that we do is something that is what we call either provenance or provenience. No? So there's a difference. To us, we make a difference between provenance, which is just a history of ownership, and which is usually to value an object or something. But provenience is even more important, especially in terms of finding the granular location of where the object was made. No? So it's kind of like in archaeology where provenience is the location where the artifact was actually recovered or acquired. So it becomes important because most of the colonial archives would say, oh, this is from the Igorot. And then you say, aside from it being derogatory, although others have self-identify as Igorot, but I guess the disadvantage is it's such a pan-regional term. It's so big. How do you begin to even go to the granular level of when you use Igorot? No? So with a lot of research, for example, this is from the American Museum of Natural History. It's a shawl, a bagobo shawl. And for a while, we thought it doesn't look bagobo at all. So, but then we dove into the archives and we saw that there was actually a name of the person who made it. Well, not the name, but she was the mother of Ayang. And that was such a kind of a great moment, no? Because you always think in terms of folk art or something that's unnamed, no? The creator is not named. But then you, with a lot of research, there are moments when you can see this sort of anonymous creator being named, being humanized. Yeah. Anyway. And lastly, another kind of thing that we do a lot is do object biographies. So we just do, we connect the objects there and create narratives, no? So the Kampilan, that's kind of the biggest hit. We get like 2,000 hits a day on on the website, and a lot of them, we don't use Google Analytics because it has third-party websites, and we can't technically, because we don't have a consent for GDPR. So we use Matomo, which is, it still gives us analytics. And the Kampilan story is a big hit. I don't know why. But anyway. So yeah, so if you're interested, for example, in the Escudo, we talk about that, and then Damian Domingo, etc. So there's lots of digital exhibits on the site. Now let's kind of turn kind of quickly to the Manila Galleon and kind of the place of the mapping project in this kind of plane, no? So this is an ongoing process. We know very much that it's the Manila Galleon trade is a very long, complex kind of historical and cultural system, and it various players, etc. And we've been discussing about national boundaries and all things like that, no? So we try to not use terms like Hispano-Filipino, for example, although many times we need to export data into the thing and we can't really annotate, no? But as much as possible to provide just provenience. Just say it's made in the Philippines, it was made in the Philippines, and you just kind of have to expound. We try to not close off the meaning of something, no? Or of close off the complexity of something by assigning it labels, which can be, yeah. So we're not afraid of the messiness, as somebody had mentioned, of seeing socioeconomic patterns and stuff like that, the confluences of similar historical contexts. A good case study for that is this biombo. So this is found in, we found this in the Ham House in the UK. This is run by the National Trust, and it's one of these. They label it the Manila panels in an inventory from, I think it was 1876. So the owner of the house had these panels for the longest time, and he had labeled it as the Manila panels with the double L. So we kind of know that it's a bit older, no? Because they usually spell Manila with the two L's when it's a bit, pre 19th century. So anyway, so this is a good example of kind of the messiness, but what we do is we try to capture that messiness, and because we have control of the tools, we can annotate, we can add as much description or videos or whatever we can on that, and not just have like a static label, no? So we add a lot of annotations to it. So one of the things that they say is this is probably executed at Manila in the Philippine Islands. So that's from the 1876 inventory. And what's interesting about this is that in the case of many different biombos, no, which is kind of like the biobos of the Japanese, I think we saw different samples of it, but this particular one is actually interesting because it has some very stylistic similarities with other ones, and more these have come to be called Chino-Filipino biombos, no? And they point out to several things like the golden arch clouds and the embossed. It's usually on paper with thick paste, and then it's tempera, not oil. So a lot of the samples that we've been seeing that have been kind of identified as biombos have those characteristics. It's really interesting when you zoom in. It's like all these European characters, and it's kind of like the Morillium. I don't know. And then you have the Lascars and different things, and then you have scenes like these with the carabaos, and then you have the walls. I was looking at the way the gates are shaped, and so you begin to see these similarities, and you're like, yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. Sorry, I forgot your name, but it's definitely not like a Mexican, a usual Mexican biombo, no? So it's a bit different, and that's why I think they designate it as either Chino or Chino-Filipino biombo. And again, if you keep going with research, you look at the archives, you try to connect, and you do see that the biombo, there's a lot of archival reports on the presence of biombos, but usually shipped to the Philippines. So these are just samples of archival records from the AGI that mention the biombo as early as 1617. So that's kind of the date that it's been designated, no? So they record 2 large biombos divided into 6 small boxes, and then in the 18th century, etc. No, the earliest one is 1611 from folding screens to Acapulco. The one that was really interesting, which I forgot to put in, was they shipped the materials to make the biombo. So that was even a bit more interesting, no? Because then it wasn't just finished biombos. So they could have been making it also in Manila. So these are just other samples of similar kind of looking biombos. This is the El Diluvio. The narrative landscape is there, the embossed golden clouds. You see the, and then this is also on paper, and it is tempera. So, yeah, so, but this is in Mexico, no? And they do say that this is not Mexican biombo. So they say it's Macau or China, but also Manila. So many scholars kind of, and this was really the latest one that I saw, which I've added to the inventory. And this is, again, 17th century colonial work, again, probably Filipino, according to the auction records. But what's really interesting, if you can see, is the these double-headed eagle on the top. So yeah, that's really interesting. But look at the sort of European people, kind of the same, looking at the motifs, the flora and the fauna, the Chinese things. So, and this was from the color collections, and it came from France, no? And they say that it was from a private collection in Mexico. So, yeah, so these are the types of things that we try to keep adding, and then keep open up the discourse around it, no? So we don't want to kind of close off the whatever. Okay. This is the Melford Hall, which is really interesting if you're in the UK. This is, Cal might know the Santissima Trinidad, they say the largest galleon that was taken by the British and shipped intact. You know? All the cargo and the hold was shipped intact to London. And Captain Hart Parker is the owner of the Melford Hall, and he has kept a lot of the cargo from Santissima Trinidad, and they're all in Melford Hall. You can visit it. There are about 500 pieces of porcelain, and they say they are runoffs from the shipment. And then there's this Santo Niño. There's also a Madonna. I couldn't put the picture up there. I ran out of space. They have these porcelainware and all this, and then a private archive of Hyde Parker, which he does not want anyone to see except me. No, but I have digitized it. So, but it's really interesting, just kind of the, what was in the thing, vermilion, there's like pepper, there's like toweling, ordinary tea, fans, I don't know. So there's lots and lots of very interesting things in the inventory, Anyway, I think but I guess because it's a mapping Philippine material cultural studies, we always kind of think of it also as looking at history from below. So we kind of we're kind of aware. It's kind of an activist site in some way because it has a purpose in some way. It's looking at Philippine cultural studies as a discipline. You always see it as fighting between asymmetrical power relations. And what we kind of want to do, because it's a Philippine material culture discipline, we want to interrogate the systems of power, decolonize kind of the usual suspects when you study the galleon. So we focus a lot on, for example, this is from 1596. This was the will of Agustin Sanchez, who was a surgeon, a ship surgeon, and he actually had in his will, or in his bill of lading, a Blanca de Ilocos. So that's really early, 1596, no? So, and those are the types of things that we are very happy when we see, because then it is, of course, something that is not, we all almost think of Manila as just an entrepot, and that we didn't really have anything that we traded, but they actually did have stuff that they traded, or at least the presence of. This is another one in Blas, California, in 1781. Pedro Cambon returned to California from the Philippines, and in his in his sort of the stuff that he had in his belongings, you have again this sort of history from the Filipino, or the manufacturing from the Filipinos, no? So you have 150 rolls of fine denim from Ilocos again, and then you have this really interesting 350 shells for the capis, no? For shells for church windows. So I guess if you go to the mission now, those must be Filipino capis shells in their windows. And then 7 rattan hats, the kind worn by the Reverend Fathers of the Philippines. So I wonder what these look like. And then 50 blue kerchiefs from China. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of really kind of cool things. One last thing is this. Oh, this is really interesting. This is blocks of wax that were washed ashore from this sunken galleon, no? But it went all the way up to Oregon. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. But what's really interesting is that they've begun to study these. These were supposed to be shipped by, made by Philippine native bees. So they have been studying it, and there are actually bees, Philippine bees, embedded in the wax. So those are the types of things that we get really excited about. So, yeah. So let me just. And one last thing. This is now there's a very good paper, an archaeological paper on the remains of a distilling thing that where and they say, I'm not really sure if this is true, but there is an archaeological evidence of mezcal using the original of the lambanog, no, how they distill the lambanog, and they've seen that this has kind of carried over to the making of mezcal or tequila as being a distilling thing, no, rather than just anyway. So just to close, these are the institutions that we are now just starting to begin. If you look at our mapping project, there's zero for Mexico. So, but we have started to begin to work with these institutions, so INA, and then this the Museo, which has 80 objects from the Philippines, beautiful ivories. So we're just starting on the Mexico. So we usually target something like this, and then do the provenance, provenience research, etc., etc. No? This one's also a really interesting museum in Monterrey. Lots of ivories, Museum of Mexican History. So yeah, we have not touched the surface of Mexico yet. So hopefully, with people from Mexico, maybe we can work together on it. Yeah. Anyway, just very quickly, I have a minute left. But I guess the heart really of the project is not just to make accessible, no, but accessible to whom. So if we just kind of mirror the colonial archives, it's just going to be another database. And who's the audience? So we try very hard to actually repatriate, digital repatriation we call. So we for example, get high resolution photos of things like this is the headdress, no? So we bring it over to source cultures. It's just more like a conversation. It's not like anything big, you know. We just kind of show them what is stored in institutions, no, outside. We also do we try to go beyond this, sort of beyond the baseline, and do knowledge exchange, artistic intervention. So we try to make the archive as a site of engagement, no? So not only with source cultures, but also even artists, no, the artistic intervention. So as we begin the project of mapping the data, we do a lot of social media too. So we post things, there's crowdsourcing, people, of course we edit everything and then make a story out of it, no? So this is one artist who's on standby. We told him that we will show him our data and that he will help us. He will start to kind of intervene, artistic intervention. And then, of course, we worked with Gabriel Santillan and Alicia May David, who is in Berlin. And we had this exhibit where she kind of interrogated the archives. This is the Bahunia flower that they say is both in Cebu and Mexico. And I was very happy actually to see that in the exhibit here, you also had this amazing artwork, no, like artistic intervention, so that the archives, in a sense, becomes kind of sources of cultural memory, no, and cultural engagement, so that it's not like dead in the shadows. So I will end there. Woo, 000, time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez-Juan, for your presentation and sharing with us the efforts to put together this database of Philippine material from all over the world. Could you elaborate more on the challenges that you faced, through this project?
Yeah, so a lot of the many institutions still are not very into digital access. So a lot of institutions don't want to share their data with us. But most of the time it's also because they haven't actually cataloged them and photographed them. So it's not just a matter of sharing data, they actually have to. So a lot of the Philippine objects are actually undervalued, or there are it's within this kind of cyclone of undervaluation, no? Because if you look at some materials, they're like not monumental, they're not like gold. I mean, of course the gold has always been cataloged and described really well, but then the ones that seem kind of insignificant are the ones that are always kind of orphaned. And that's exactly what we want to highlight, no? So that's one challenge. Another is, I guess it's kind of this, we always talk about the slow archive, if you're familiar with that essay. If you Google it, it's a really good essay on how much work goes into actually annotating and describing and deepening the descriptions, taking out all these derogatory words, but really making it like an archive for the source cultures. No, so that's another thing. We usually, if data is given to us, we can upload it very quickly, but then it's kind of like a data dump, you know. So there's that very slow process of annotating it, looking for derogatory words, etc. So that's another really long, very long process. And I guess, I don't know, I think those are the biggest challenges.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take questions from the audience. You can just raise your hand over there.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. I just wanted to ask the two questions, really. Sorry, I walked in a bit late. Is it the project is supported by whom? Is it by the London University?
So we got seed funding from Lauren Legarda, which is the Senator Lauren Legarda at the beginning of the project in 2018. And then since then, we've been getting external UK-funded research grants. So like the manuscript one is AHRC and EH, and then the sound archives. The mapping side is, a lot of it is really, there's no real funding for it. A lot of it's volunteer work. SOAS supports me by giving me interns. Okay. So like 3 interns so they help me encode the data, and then, you know, but a lot of our writers are not paid.
Okay, all right, thank
you. But
yeah. That's more impressive then.
Yeah.
The other quick question was that you mentioned there was a lot of material brought over to Liverpool University from America.
Yes.
And what kind of material was it?
So they were all from the 1904 St. Louis Fair. Ah. So they actually do a lot of museum exchanges. So they had exchanged it for African masks and other types of material culture. And then, so they usually look for doubles, for example. The American Museum of Natural History is like 10,000 objects, and a lot of them are doubles. So what they do is they exchange. But I guess after that exchange, they never really cataloged it properly.
So, but what actually was it? Was it clothing or
so it's a lot of tools, domestic tools. There's a replica of a rice mill, for example. It's a huge one. A lot of boats, models for boats. There's a lot of the cape, the raincoat, and then there's lots of spoons, always lots of spoons, wooden spoons from Ifugo.
It's just gone back into storage, you say?
Oh, yeah.
There's not going to be no plans to display?
Actually, but Liverpool Museum is actually very progressive. We've had meetings with them, and they are actually open to repatriating physically. Oh. And that's kind of, we kind of go gentle into like trying to get the data first so that we know what's there, and then eventually, like, if they're open. But, it's repatriation, physical repatriation, of course, a very, very complicated process. Okay. But at least they're open to it. But sometimes we say, we need to define repatriation very locally. Like, what do the people really want from these objects? A lot of them don't really want the objects, actually, because they don't want to take care of it or be liable for conserving it, because it does cost a lot of money to, like, have to have a place to store it in. So, for example, we went to the Blaan, and we just showed them the banig, the mat, and they were very interested in the patterns and the dyes that were used. So instead of actually wanting it back, they wanted high resolution photos and then kind of technical analysis of the of the patterns. So it was an interesting definition of repatriation, more like knowledge transfer rather than physical repatriation. So it's a very localized thing. We've had several people, there was a British woman who actually returned her collection to the Tivoli, which was really amazing. She was there as a volunteer, and then she she decided before she died, she says, I'm going to return all my Tiboli objects. So we were actually on the way there to bring high resolution photos from the Field Museum in Chicago. And then she contacted me and said, like, I actually have a collection I want to return. So she came with us, and it was so amazing, just the significance of, they believe, of course, in the spirit of the objects, and they believe in, they call tulus kimo, which is the spirit of the objects calling each other's other objects home. And since that repatriation, actually, more and more, like an old Tiboli man returned, donated a spear to the co-op that they formed for it. So yeah, it's very complex, needs to be really localized and very specific to the situation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any? I think the gentleman.
Thank you. Just a comment. I, for one, have sat here looking forward to this last presentation by Cristina, by Dr. Juan. And basically, I just wanted to convey, and I think I can on behalf of all the Filipinos here, and all our friends, which would probably include everyone, thank you for what you're doing, Cristina. This is amazing. We admire you, and we thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
And thanks to ACM for this occasion where we do get to meet Dr. Martinez-Juan and hear about her project. And you have all of our support, of course.
Thank you for that comment.
He's the director of the National Museum in the Philippines, if you don't know. Woohoo! It's one of the really interesting things about the conference too, because we've been meeting a lot of people that we know we can work with. So hopefully that has been the same for you as well.
I think we have time for one last. Yes, the gentleman in the middle. Yes.
Apologies. Two questions, short ones. The first question would be talking about archival records. Is that the Battle of Manila in 1945 totally destroyed some of all these archivals. To what extent, through all this archival mapping, that we are able to recover all these lost treasures due to the battle? And the second question is the recent development in AI and all this facial recognition. How have you seen, or you have seen that it assists in this archival mapping? Thank you.
I'm not very sure about the bombing. I know a lot of, Beth would know, a lot of the material culture has been completely, Beth, for the bombing of World War II. Was that the question? There's very little left, I think. But, it's more and more things are coming back. There are private collectors who are like donating to the National Museum, and they're more and more becoming aware of the need for, as I was saying, this cultural, trying to heal this cultural lobotomy of these objects that carries these knowledge systems that are slowly coming back and hopefully will be of use. As for the other question, what was, sorry again? Oh yeah, AI. I do use AI mostly to. If there's a very long description, like for the sound archives, it's a very good tool for condensing material. Like if you want, there's a transcription and you want to give it like prompts, like very mechanical kind of stuff, like give me a 200-word description for this object, and you feed it with a prompt. It's very good for that. I haven't used it for like facial recognition or anything, but there is some sense the algorithm is machine learning. So the more you feed of the different samples that we do, the more it learns, So the more it can connect these things. So, you can feed a prompt to an algorithm and say, look for things that have golden arches. in things, or like the cloud, no? And it can look for it in your database because you have the data online already. So yeah, it's a very powerful tool. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the inspiring presentation, Dr. Martinez-Juan. And that's all the time we have today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see that we still have a lot of people staying back for the last segment, last panel. Over the past 2 days, you have heard from many very important speakers and scholars who reminded us that over the 250 years of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade is one that is full of complicated systems, constantly in flux and evolving due to the time and needs of the various sort of parties at work. And there were multiple agents, in this whole sort of trading networks as well that really complicates the whole history for us. The long and dangerous voyages across the Pacific brought riches from Asia to the rest of the world. While there are some detailed historical records of the trade, we must remember and prepare ourselves to have an open-minded view that there are frauds, inaccuracies, and misinformation because of undisclosed contrabands, pursuits of profits, and primarily perhaps greed as part of human nature. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade route via the Philippines, Mexico, and Spain was a remarkable trading system that connected Asia, the Americas, and Europe. Each part where it touches, may it be the port or the city, is like an axis mundi, extending its webs and drew global citizens and connect cultures. We hope that through this exhibition and this conference, you would agree that the galleons were much more than a colonial systems. Many cultures participated in these patterns of exchange. India, Southeast Asia, Japan, and China all contributed objects and ideas to the world. Silver and other natural products from the Americas came to Asia in exchange. In terms of relevance, these contexts create immense impacts knowingly and unknowingly. We are still living in its legacies today. And a few scholars have already reminded us repeatedly that it is important, at least also for the position of ACM, is not to privilege any single culture in the system when looking at this history. Rather, we appreciate the many influences, mixtures, and connections made possible by art. Again, I stressed this point many times already. We need to remember that art built bridges in times of divisions. Some might wonder why Singapore or the ACM is interested in the Manila Galleon exhibition. The galleon systems ended in 1815 with the rise of other national shipping networks and, of course, with what is happening with Spain and the disastrous Napoleonic Wars. It is no coincidence that the end of the galleons was quickly succeeded by the establishment of Singapore in 1819. Singapore rose to become the center of the trading network, very much like the old Manila-Acapulco galleon trade. And the rise of mixed cultures also echoed the galleon networks as well. Therefore, the story of Manila-Acapulco galleons in the international system of exchange is essential to us here in our story in Singapore as well. There are many interesting starting points when we begin to conceptualize this exhibition. One of which stemmed from this object at the ACM is a forefront writing cabinet made in the Philippines. After a quick surveys of international exhibition on the subject of Manila Galleon or Asia, Latin American exchanges, it's very obvious, well, how should I put it? There is little mentioning of furniture, strangely. Even if there is inclusion of works of art of furniture, it is often shown in passing. And then I realized that there are not many articles being written specifically on this genre of work as well. It seems like this corpus of, or these types of furniture are significantly fewer or rarer. And the decorative designs are very different as compared to the ones from India and Japan. This cabinet is a great cross-cultural work of art, and I guess today in this conference, towards the end, I don't even know what to call it anymore. Cross-cultural work of art, global art, network objects, hybrid objects, you know, however you want to call it, I guess. Well, you know, as you can see, the form is of a European type, but it was made in the Philippines. And again, you know, it's all these layers, right, as we can see from these 2 days. Made in the Philippines, probably by Chinese craftsmen, Chinese makers, or Chinese makers with local collaborators, or possibly by local Filipino makers who were influenced by the work of Chinese furniture makers as well. So how do we attribute, or how do we, you know, expand such definitions of objects in this very complicated network? This is just a view of the array of different types of writing cabinets, and I just want to show it to you that they considered, you know, popularity from the 16th towards the 19th century. Essentially, they are all small chests of drawers. Sometimes they come with the hinge forefront panel. Sometimes they don't. There's just no a cover for it. And these would usually be used to be locked to secure valuable documents and goods. These intimate pieces of furniture invited close inspections and were often elaborately decorated. Furniture makers in the Americas and Asia also contributed in new motifs and genre to these materials, usually through the use of rare hardwoods, exotic materials such as tortoiseshell, mother of pearl, ivory, and bone. Lacquered cabinets, as we have seen in some of the presentation today, also made in Asia, were exported to the Americas and Europe. Decorative schemes were borrowed from symbolic systems of China, Mexico, and the Renaissance in Europe to basically, you know, meet the tastes and demands of sophisticated connoisseurs. We know that Spanish and Mexican colonial inventories of elite households often contain Spanish, Flemish, Napoleon, Italian, Germans, and Asian cabinets of such as well. Drawing your attention back to the cabinet at ACM, the interior possesses 6 drawers, and here are some of the details of the drawers. The claw and paw shaped feet with the emerging from the sort of animal or beast mast. We have already said that it was made in the Philippines with local woods, completed with bone inlay, not ivory, and with silver fitting. Of course, now it's a bit darkened and tarnished. The animal heads with the emergent paw and ball feet at each corners are very similar also to Chinese furniture, particularly in the Ming and Qing dynasty, which led us to conclude, given that there is also a community of Southern Chinese makers, furniture makers in the Philippines as well. But of course, not to discount the fact that, you know, in the form of whether is it lion, dragon, or beast head sprouting, the claw and ball feet are also commonly seen in European furniture as early as the Renaissance period. And this design continues in Europe in the later period as well. It makes this furniture very interesting and engaging with its parallel cross-cultural elements between East and West. But what is really interesting, at least for the ACM example, is the bone inlay decoration on the interior of the forefront lead. It shows the foundation myth of Tenochtitlan, the capital city of the Mexicas. After independence, the symbol became the coat of arms of Mexico, which we today see in its national flag. At the center, a crowned eagle perches on a nopal flowering cactus, which grows atop of the Aztec glint for water. The eagle holds a snake in his beak. A nobleman at the left with the beaded necklace points to the bird, points to the eagle, wearing a headband and a long cloak. His attire highlights his high social position. On the right, a noblewoman gestured with a necklace towards the eagle, holding a flowering branch. There are several variants to this founding myth. Most versions mention about how the patron god Huitzilopochtli instructed the Aztec to migrate until they encountered an eagle on a cactus within a lake. Following the words of Huitzilopochtli, they departed from their place of origin at Aztlan and journeyed until they saw this vision, at which the location they founded Tenochtitlan on Lake Texcoco. It is extremely unusual to find Aztec imagery on a European-style four-front cabinet made in the Philippines, probably by or influenced by Chinese makers, which suggests that this cabinet was something very special and made for an important person in New Spain, either on a commission or as a gift. To us at the museum, this work is an important testimony of the trans-Pacific, trans-cultural nature of the Manila Galleon trade. I'm just going to skip right through. Again, these are some of the codexes, and we have Dr. Brito here as well. Perhaps who will also could enlighten us. As you can see, they follow the similar pattern with the eagle and nopal on the center. Sometimes the snake does not appear. But what is really interesting, at least, is like if you notice the one at the bottom, there is a presentation scene of a beaded necklace as well, which sort of makes you wonder what is the connection of these imagery and where were the source of some of this imagery as well. Again, through the course of this research, we already know that there are two very famous examples of such four-front cabinets made in the Philippines, published in a very important publication on Filipino ivory. They belong to a private collection, and they are very similar, but in a quick survey of all these objects, the one in ACM and one in Mexico and the Philippines, they are all rather different. You don't see one that is very similar. They all kind of change the ways of how they decorate as well. But again, as you can see, most of the examples that we know of, the insides are well, basically plain, as opposed to the one at ACM. This large chest, which is also on display at the exhibition, is very similar in terms of the exterior of the inlay work. And the image on the top right, perhaps is also very close to the ACM example, but it has decorative sort of floral sprays on its border. That belongs to the Museum Sumaya in Mexico City. Again, you see they are all very different. There is one which we know of that has the coat of arms at the Franz Mayer Museum, which is the coat of arms is unfortunately yet to be identified. But I want you to take notice of the corners where they all have this very interesting sort of double-headed eagles. And sometimes these double-headed eagles, the design are so abstract that it becomes like a floral bouquet spray as well. And you can see also how some of these design, perhaps the makers take their own liberty to morph the design further as well. But also just remember these sort of leafy designs. And quite interesting. I mean, I remember yesterday, Roberto Junco, you show some of the porcelain shards with this kind of leafy designs, and you comparing it with some of the source from European manuscript as well. Again, we see that happening in some of these, but one of the most interesting thing is that it all comes in ivory as well. It all comes in bone inlay, which is something very different. That the types of furniture made in the Philippines, the inlays are usually made of bone rather than ivory. So contemporary pieces, as we can see in Gujarat, India, for the Portuguese market, they employed ivory as well. And if you think about it, ivory was not exceptionally rare in the Philippines. It was used for religious sculpture. But one of the reasons that perhaps it may have been regarded as appropriate for sacred images only, which in turn prevented its use on circular furniture. I'm not too sure about that. Or maybe there may have been a more pragmatic reason, is that bone is much more cheaper than ivory. But however, if you follow the influence, at least in the Spanish outside territories, in Spain, since the Nasrid period, which is 13th century to about 15th century, artists in Granada has often mixed ivory and bone in their inlaid furniture. And this practice may have been transferred to Spanish colonial possessions. And of course, you see other examples from India, Syria, or Egypt as well. And lastly, I just want to point out that, when looking at some of these objects, here we come back to the leafy inlaid work. They all possess some kind of a dragon or serpent kind of outlook. And then you see very similar design as well in some of these open work, mesa alta, large-scale mesa alta in Intramuros collection as well. And there again, you see where the morphing of the double-headed eagle becomes more like a floral bouquet spray that appears in the corner decoration. And of course, there are a few particular interesting examples that never did not consistently appear, are these medallions, these roundos with the circle at the center and this kind of circle with a diamond-shaped motifs. Sometimes you also see them in codices as well, and some of the Aztec imagery. So what is the connection here, and is there something to do, deeper to do with the decoration? These are some of the Chinese examples that we are talking about, which sort of connects, again, the animal mask with the paw and ball feet that we have been seeing in most of these kind of Filipino furniture. Well, this is the famous example at the San Augustine Church, again, all bearing this kind of decoration design in most of the furniture work. And I just can't help, when looking into all this 17th and 18th century Filipino-made furniture, probably by Chinese maker or as a collaboration, and then you start to think about it, between the 19th and 20th century, what is happening in our region with the Peranakan. They also have a lot of Chinese makers furniture who are working in this region, who also settled down here, who have their own workshops in the Strait settlements. If you look at just these two examples, aren't they sort of very similar in a way of styles? We heard from Circe regarding about the motifs of peonies being transmitted, being very universal. And here we have the same thing happening with furniture as well, as a very hybrid form of work. So with this, I would like to end with, I guess we are just all scratching the surface for some of these, again, whatever you want to call them, cross-cultural work of art, a global network objects. And we hope that this conference, this exhibition, is again, I don't want to say it's a beginning because it has already started, but maybe we can all come together and discuss further about some of these very interesting cross-cultural objects. Again, I'd just like to end by thanking the Hinrich Foundation for as a key supporter for the conference. I would like to thank all the speakers. Thank you, everyone. This project is 5 years in the making. Some of you, I reached out 5 years ago, some of you much later, but we all come together and deliver the conference, deliver the catalog. So again, a big thank you to all of you and for sharing all your insights in the past 2 days. And if you would indulge me, I would like to thank the team, my colleagues who have worked with me tirelessly to prepare and co-organize this conference. Melissa, Denise, and Priscilla, don't know where you are. But as well as other colleagues who assisted in various matters, Ben Chiesa and Sharon on editing and proofreading, Jeff on visual designs on the collaterals, Angie, Shumin, and Amanda coming back on the sales of the catalog. Thank you. Nor and her team from the developments, from making sure our docents, our patrons are all happy. And of course, I want to extend thanks to a shout out to my colleagues, curatorial colleagues, Naomi, Michael, and of course Alan for moderating the sessions. And I would just also like to thank Junhao, Lester, and Purple Forest team for ensuring the smooth management of this event. Thank you, everyone, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.